Podcast episode number 42.
On this show, we take a look at the intricate detail and symbolism of the Japanese irezumi, also known as the tattoo, with Osaka tattoo artist Hori Beni. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Tokyo Podcast. I'm your host Anthony Joe, and on today's show we're going to be talking about the rather interesting and controversial topic of irezumi or tattoos here in Japan. You know, Japan is home to a rich and long history of tattooing, and Japanese motifs and styles have certainly made their way into tattoo parlors all over the world. But even so, many people with tattoos still face widespread discrimination here in Japan. And the reason for this is because for years, tattoos have been associated with the Yakuza, which is the Japanese organized crime. Now, things are slowly changing, certainly not as fast as they are in the West. And even though there's still widespread discrimination here, many people feel that getting a tattoo in Japan is one of the top places in the world to get ink done. And many Japanese tattoo artists, ironically, are more famous overseas than they are back in their home country of Japan. So on today's show, I'm going to talk to a tattoo artist, Mr. Hori Beni, who's been tattooing in Japan for close to a decade, about the history of tattoos and what it's like to be a tattoo artist here in Japan. But before we get to Beni, I am pleased to welcome back to the show Unrested, who I interviewed back on Tokyo Podcast episode number 9 about his very popular YouTube channel. Unrested has been working as an English teacher in Japan now for some time, and he joins me today to talk about a very special announcement he recently made on his YouTube channel. Hey Unrested, welcome back to Tokyo Podcast.
Hey, it's good to be back.
Cool. Good to have you back. So I see that you're still making videos, and you're up to video 199 now, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
And recently you made a very special announcement on video 198. Do you want to tell my audience about that?
Yeah, it's a big thing for me. I finally quit teaching and completely work as a freelance artist now, or I guess I could say a fantasy artist.
A fantasy artist. Wow, cool. So for those of you who don't know, you were originally an art teacher in the States. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. The best thing about it is that I'm finally using my degree. I got my degree in art and minor in education. And I was teaching art in America. And that's kind of what got me to teaching here. But teaching English, I'll be honest, was never really my passion.
But it's cool that you're able to use your background now here in Japan.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it finally feels like my work has purpose for the most part. I mean, that's the biggest thing, that my art actually has a place to go, because even after I would work for 8 hours of teaching each day, I'd come home and I'd still be drawing for sometimes another 8 hours, like late into the night. And not that there's really anything wrong with that, to pursue your hobby with a passion, but it kind of just felt like, who was I doing this for? I'm like putting it on the shelf as soon as I finished. And it just feels great to finally have a purpose for it.
And also must be nice to get out of the English teaching gig, eh?
Yeah, I think honestly, anybody who becomes what I call the quote unquote lifer, the person who lives in Japan, who plans to live here for the rest of their life, I think everybody kind of either looks to break out on their own with English if they love teaching it, which there's nothing wrong with. But I think for the other half, they look to finally get into something else. And I feel like that's something that doesn't really come until you've been here for, a few good years.
Like you said in your video, I think you have to do your time doing the English teaching route before opportunities start to open up.
Yeah, exactly. I've caught on to that theme of doing your time. I get a lot of people who write me emails all the time about coming here and just starting whatever their interest is. Number one, they're interested in Japan. Number two, maybe they want to be an artist like myself, or I even get crazy stuff like they want to become doctors and stuff here, which is, if you know what goes into that, you know how hilarious it would be to just show up here and say you want to be a doctor. But Not that there's anything wrong with that. Pursue your dreams. I'm definitely a person who says pursue your dreams, but I feel like the big thing is if you really do want to come here, that's cool. Expect to come here as a teacher, and then be ready to do your time to get into what you really want to do, like what your true passion is. And that's kind of what my whole video was about is, okay, make priority number one Japan, and know that teaching is probably going to come along with it. After that, pursue your hobby on the side, do your time with it, and look for the networking that'll eventually get you into what you want to do.
Right. I think just like moving to any new city or new country, you can't expect to, start off big right away. You gotta start making some contacts and networking, getting your name out there. And I think what's particularly important for Japan is learning the culture.
Yes, very important. And we were just talking about it ourselves. If you decide you're going to launch something on a Japanese company or try and work with a Japanese company or even get hired directly by a Japanese company, it does take time to learn the culture that goes along with it, I feel, as far as just knowing the esoteric, not just body language, but just even social and dialogue interactions, even if it be in English, not even if it's in your own native language, how to be more subtle. I think that's probably one of the hardest things. It was hard for me to learn too, how to be more subtle and how to not be so crass with your own opinion.
And it's actually interesting what you just said there is that even in English, because it's tempting for us if we're going into a meeting and the Japanese people are speaking English to automatically kind of resort back to our English cultural style.
Yes, exactly. To bust out with sarcastic jokes that we think are hilarious to us, but absolutely make the mood extremely uncomfortable for Japanese people right away. Things about just like I said again, being aggressive, like saying your opinion too aggressively, you won't just like crush the conversation. You'll absolutely stop it. Like
right.
It'll just stop, and people be like, "Oh, you're like that? Okay, well, it's been nice meeting you today. We'll give you a call." Never.
Right. And the thing in Japan is, when the conversation stops or when they're not interested in doing with you anymore, it just completely stops. Like there's this silence.
Yeah. As I say, the needle comes off the record.
Right.
You hear that sudden screech, everything's come to a stop. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So doing your time is not only making some contacts, learning the language, but also learning the culture so that when you are presented with an opportunity, you can just take a hold of it right away and run with it.
Yeah. Exactly. And don't be afraid to make mistakes on the way there. I think probably all of us will, unless you were raised in Japanese culture, being westernized really changes your views of things, and you do have to slowly adapt. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. And do know that the Japanese actually are really quite, I'd say they give you a lot of leeway. Like they really... Especially if you let them know how long you've been here.
Right.
If you say I'm fresh off the boat, like people are going to be like, oh, okay, well, he totally doesn't know that he needs to, just calm down a little bit here. But at the same time, try to, as the number one thing that I taught myself was try to stop and observe and just try to copy what you see, and you'll really start to meld in quick.
Right. So for the audience members of mine who are artists and all dreaming about coming to Japan and doing the same thing, can you give us a kind of a quick summary of how you went from an English teacher to full-time artist?
Okay, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. It's a bit strange. I started out like everybody else teaching, and meanwhile I was always doing my hobby. And while I was doing my hobby, I started to get back into a small gaming group of tabletop gamers, which is like, pen and paper RPGs. I don't know if everybody understands that. It's not I'll try to make it as simple as this. It's not a computer RPG. It's a RPG that uses books, papers, and pencils. And we all live in Japan, and we play online, and we actually use Google+. And I found this little community. It's really small. And I would always draw for them what had happened in our adventure. And eventually some of them were like, well, you should send your pictures off to the company that we play this game with, like the company that makes these books that we use. And I was like, it's kind of a good idea. I've done stuff like that before, and people were like, nice, whatever. So my one friend decided to send it off anyway, and I sent off some stuff too. And right away, I started to get responses back that they were interested in me drawing for some of their publications that were coming out in the upcoming months. And first, it started out with nothing but working for exposure, pretty much. I wasn't actually getting paid at first. I was just excited to get my stuff published, and I guess that kept me motivated. So I kept drawing for these people, and it started out with only their weekly fanzine that came out. And then after that, they loved those pictures so much, they're like, well, why don't you draw for A Little Adventure? And I was like, yeah, sure. And then they were like, why don't you just do all the drawings for this book? And recently, the biggest one I got, they're coming out with a book of just like monsters for the game. And they gave me full illustration rights, the entire book, for a hefty commission. We'll put it that way. I don't want to say the exact amount, but it's a commission that far outshines what I would make teaching. And that's when I finally realized, holy cow, like, I don't really need to sign another contract. Like, after my contract at school finished, I was working part-time, and I said, wow, I don't think I need to sign another contract. And I have so many more projects still laid out in the future. I had a little talk with my wife. I said, look, here's all the money that's come in. I showed her a budget, and she's like, oh, okay, well, that's more than teaching. I was like, yeah, exactly. So maybe I should just quit the teaching and just do this. And she's like, yeah, maybe you should. Money always wins when it comes to debating with your wife in Japan. I think that rule of thumb will work for all of you. If you come here and get married, let your wife know that whatever you do, that's the new job, will make more money. And it could be, you could be the poop smith, and she'll say yes, like.
And she'll be supportive.
Yeah, she'll be like, go for it, ganbatte ne. Like you'll be ready to be supported by that. But yeah, so that's kind of what led to it. Is it eventually reached a point where it far outshined what I was doing with teaching, and I was like, okay, let's go for it.
Wow, that's cool. That's a really interesting story. I'm always I'm impressed when I hear kind of like these kind of, not your case isn't rags to riches, but where you started off kind of something as a hobby, but then turned it into a business.
Honestly, it surprised even me. Like I'd actually kind of almost given up hope on it, but I'd never given up my passion for it. And I guess maybe that's what everybody should try to keep in mind is, even if you lose hope, try to keep your passion for your craft no matter what it is.
Right. And we should also mention, just for those of you who haven't listened to Tokyo Podcast number 9, you've been in Japan for how long?
5 years going on 6 now.
Right. So these kinds of opportunities are here, but they don't come overnight.
Yes, that is completely correct. And I've been told by older gaijin too, they always say, hey, you don't want to do teaching forever, man. You got to just open your eyes and you'll see more stuff. And I had maybe seen glimpses of this. And I've seen many people either start their own business or finally branch out on their own. And I'm like, but that's because they speak perfect Japanese and they read kanji. And no. I mean, for my job, I don't even need to do that. So that's not totally true. You don't need to become mega fluent or anything like that, or, hyper, Japanese otaku. You can do it on your own and make it on your own. But like you just said, you need to look for the doorways that let you do that.
I think in some ways, learning the culture is almost more important than learning the language.
Yeah, that's true.
Because if you like say, I know people who study Japanese in America and the university level, they come here and they can speak it, right off the plane.
Mm-hmm.
But they still don't quite get where the culture is, where the opportunities are. And, the opportunities that are going to come to like foreigners generally will involve some type of English.
Yes, that is very true. Yeah, you're probably, I don't know if I can think of anybody. Even people I know who started restaurants, it's because their food is based around Western food with English names.
Right.
Like that's what makes them exotic and people want to eat there. So,
right.
Yeah, I would say it's hard. It's really hard. Like even my style of art, if I ever get Japanese commissions, they want it because it's a Western style of art. And of course, they 100% want me to write English if I put any words in there at all. They don't want me to try and do Japanese. It looks way cooler to them in English.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah.
So I think that, don't wait until you've got the perfect Japanese down, or don't wait until you've got, JLPT1. I think these kinds of things hold people back if they're always waiting for that. Look for the opportunities with what you've got, and then worry about the language later.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you 100% on that one because, even myself, like I've said before, I can speak Japanese, but I can't read or write, worth anything. It's actually quite pathetic how I read and write. But I can speak, but that's all I needed. Like I didn't have to get into, writing down exactly what I'm going to do because I'm an artist, so I draw it out if I need to.
Having said that, though, if you can master the language, I mean, it seriously does open up a hell of a lot of doors for you here. Let's not, diminish that, but I wouldn't let it be an excuse or a barrier from anyone looking to make a name for themselves here in Japan.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, you shouldn't ignore it. You should still try to learn it and master it. I 100% agree, but don't let it be a crutch at the same time that you constantly lean on to say, I can't get a job, outside of teaching.
Right. So tell us then about this Indiegogo campaign that your publisher is running.
This is actually stuff I never even knew about before I got into how this whole doing art for people who do small gaming books. There's sites like Kickstarter and this other one, Indiegogo, my publisher is on right now. And how it works is people pretty much just give as little as they want, $1 being the minimum. And I don't know, I think the biggest was like 50 or 75, or maybe even
$100. $100.
Yeah, maybe there was $100 on there.
Yeah.
If you go to Indiegogo.com and you look up Unusual Suspects, that's the book that I'm currently illustrating right now. And you can go ahead, and if you even just donate $1, you actually get something from the project. You'll get a PDF that'll let you see what the book is. So you're actually purchasing the book for $1, which is, I mean, if you think about it, an awesome deal.
Right.
But if you donate even more, you start to get more stuff from it. I think a copy of the book in its actual print. You'll get maybe a special like gold foil bound copy or something like that. I don't know how far up it goes as far as the different levels because I'm not really about the marketing. Sorry if I've messed up marketing department.
What's particularly interesting about this campaign is that the demand for this book is quite high. And so if you look at the people who've contributed $1, well, that's only 2 people. And actually the number of people who've contributed the highest amount, which is $100, is 9.
Yeah, that really surprised me too. I guess that's just another thing of me being new to this whole process.
Right.
Yeah, that really blew me away too.
So more people have contributed the highest amount than the lowest amount.
Yeah. It's really quite surprising how that stuff works. I mean, it makes sense though. You pay for a product that you want.
Right.
And you'll pay to have it made even. And
basically what these people are doing is they're ensuring that the product will be made by purchasing it in advance.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what is this book? If someone were to contribute some money, what is the book about?
Oh boy. Okay, so this is kind of esoteric. Everyone out there, if you like role-playing games, you'll understand. If you don't, this might be a little bit confusing. Okay, so after there's a new popular fantasy role-playing game out here, and it's called Dungeon Crawl Classics, okay? And this is kind of like Dungeons & Dragons redone back when Gary Gygax ran the company. I don't know if everybody knows who Gary Gygax is. He was on The Simpsons once, so he must have been pretty famous, okay? So Gary Gygax started that company. That was the first role-playing game ever. Every game you play now, like Dragon Quest and everything, is based off of that game, so you owe it quite a bit. This is that game done again, but using all the retro art that goes with it, such as the old retro artists like William McCausland, Earl Otis, and stuff like that. It's bringing all that stuff back because now so much stuff is digital art that this is bringing back that hand-drawn art. This book is for that main source book, the DCC book, Dungeon Crawl Classics source book. And that's just all the rules. This book being published now is kind of like the gods for that fantasy world, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
Because within this, you choose your god. Your god predicts your spells that you would cast and, when you can ask for divine aid and stuff like that. So I don't really know as much about it technically as I should probably. I just get assignments and they say draw this kind of god. Okay, I draw it.
Right.
So, but if you're into that RPG already and you're looking to expand your knowledge in the books that you have, this would be a perfect addition.
Right. Okay. Wow. Cool. And you are drawing. What are you drawing? You're drawing all the god characters.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of everything. I've got a map in there that people can use, like a map for the game. I've got, so much in there. There's magical items. I drew every single magical item in there. It was like all these little postcard-sized pictures that took forever to draw. And yes, I'm drawing some monsters too. I'm drawing some spreads, some double pages. The cover art was already chosen before any artist was brought onto the team because they already had some stock stuff they wanted to use. Right. So nobody's doing that. I am working with one other artist, and he's the digital artist, and I'm the hand-drawn artist.
Well, that's great. So if people want to check out the Indiegogo campaign, they can just go to Indiegogo.com and do a search for Unusual Suspects. There's about 2 weeks left in the campaign, so if you're interested in the book, contribute some money. And I also highly recommend checking out Unrested YouTube channel. You can go on YouTube and do a search for Unrested. Do you have anything special planned for your 200th video?
Shh, it's a secret.
Okay. Okay, so go on YouTube, search for Unrested, and watch for his upcoming spectacular 200th video. Hey, Unrested, thanks for coming on the show again. I enjoyed talking with you.
Yep, always good to be here.
The history of tattooing in Japan is one that extends as far back as the Jomon period, which is 10,000 BC. But even though tattooing in Japan has been around for a long time and filled with historic symbolism, it hasn't gained the widespread public acceptance that tattooing has in many Western countries. To walk us through this journey of tattooing in Japan, I'm joined by renowned tattoo artist Hori Benny, who has been tattooing in Japan since 8 years ago, first starting off as an apprentice and then turning professional in 2007. Benny can be found at the Chopstick Tattoo Studio in Osaka. Hey Benny, welcome to Tokyo Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me today, Anthony. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Now, I just wanted to ask you a quick question. Maybe you could give my audience a quick background on what brought you to Japan.
What brought me to Japan? Besides the airplane,
Right.
I suppose it would have been an interest that I had in Japanese art and culture that kicked off in my youth and sort of grew from there. I'd started studying Japanese language when I was living back in the U.S. and as I got older and began, continued to study more and more, I realized that if I didn't actually make a trip to Japan at some point, that might not have been for very much. So what I did is I decided to come over here for about half a year and see how I liked it, and it's been almost 11 years now. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you a tattoo artist back in the States?
No, I wasn't. Not at all. Back at the States, I was basically doing graphic design, and that was it. I'd just gotten out of school. I was doing graphic design, and then even though I'd only been in a company for about half a year, I was starting to feel the itch to, get out and travel and make good on some of the promises I'd made to myself when I was younger, like going to Japan. So.
Right. And when in the States, did you have an interest in tattooing? Was it something that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I did. I hadn't really thought, oh, gee, I think I want to be a tattoo artist or anything like that. But at the time, I was working around, I was living around a couple tattoo studios, and one of them had a Japanese guest artist that came out, and they couldn't speak any Japanese to him. He couldn't speak any English, and they knew that I was sort of around in this area, and so they said, hey, would you mind coming in and doing a little translation for this guy? We can make it with your while, all this. And so I sort of went over there and made acquaintances with this guy. His name was Goch, and he's a Japanese tattoo artist up in Kyoto. And him and I sort of struck up a bit of a friendship, and as I was looking more and more through his work and how dynamic it was, compared to anything that I'd ever seen in a tattoo before. You gotta remember, this is about 13, 14 years ago now, so tattooing still wasn't quite as widely spread even in Western culture as it is today, but I was looking at how dynamic his style was, and it really got its hooks in me, and I thought, man, like, this is really interesting stuff. And that was sort of how the roots got planted. It was really the later, after I came to Japan, that I started to meet more and more Japanese tattoo artists through him, that I thought, yeah, this is where the compasses are sort of pointing to my...
It's interesting that what you said there, like the Japanese tattoo design and ability is amazing when you consider the detail that they go into it. It's kind of a shame that it's not more widely accepted in its own country.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, especially because now tattooing is booming so much in the West, especially in the U.S., Canada, Europe, Australia. And they have all these tattoo conventions, which I'm sure you're aware of, but they're in almost every city in the world these days. Tattooers from all over the place gather, they tattoo, they compare art styles, there's vendors, they're selling things. So these are these big events, yeah. And now it's become the popular thing to have artists from abroad, not just other Western-style tattoo artists, but, for example, Maori artists or Japanese tattoo artists. And they'll bring these Japanese tattoo artists sometimes all the way over. Not many cases, but in some cases they'll pay for their plane fare and whatnot. And once they get over there, they'll have a big tatami sort of platform set up for these guys to work on.
Oh, yeah.
And, all the cameras are flashing. Everybody has all their eyes. Japanese tattoo artists, and they come back to Japan, and there's no ticker tape parade for them over here. No one really is interested in how hard they work or the kind of amazing work they do in Japan. I find pretty common throughout a lot of genres of Japan, actually, is that many Japanese who live in Japan are not always aware of how wonderful a lot of their country's culture is. I think it's maybe true for all of us. Once we leave our own countries and our own comfort zones, we kind of see how the rest of the world looks at us. So
Right.
It would be my hope, I suppose, for more Japanese people to see how wonderful Irezumi and tattoo culture is in their country, even if that requires that they step outside of it for a minute.
Right, right. Do you think part of the reason why is because tattooing still has that stigma of a criminal element here in Japan?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely the case. I want to say, having been in the Japanese tattoo world for about a decade, that it's changed and things are getting better and this and that, and I really don't know that that's true. I don't think it's made the kind of... I mean, we all know that things take time to change, through the generations, but man, it's really... it really hasn't changed so much in the last 10 years. I mean, I think that, yeah, the criminal element perception is a big deal. A lot of that comes from things like movies and manga, and, it's sort of like how do you easily portray a criminal in a manga or a movie or a TV show when you only have so many seconds? Well, the easiest way is just to slap tattoos on them. And if you continue doing that forever, it just becomes like a shortcut to say criminal. And then that takes up root in people's subconscious. So I don't blame anybody for thinking the things they do. It's what they've been taught. I think that there was a big push to change it in about the late 90s, about 98, 99. There was sort of a big tattoo boom in Japan, with a lot of people getting a lot of Western-style tattoos, and that was sort of changing things a little bit. But now it seems like there's been a return to conservatism towards the tattoo world.
The irony for me is that most people that I know who are serious tattoo collectors usually don't show off their tattoos. It's the guy with the tribal armband that wants everybody to see it. So it's ironic that here... You got these guys who got this intricate artwork, but they keep it hidden, which is my experience and what most serious tattoo collectors do anyways.
And I think that's another good point, is that tattooing doesn't exactly translate to Irezumi perfectly. The way we view tattoos in the West is not really the same how they view them in Japan. For example, nobody's really trying to take off their shirts and flash around their tattoos, and when they've just gotten a fresh piece of work done, to wrap it in clear plaster graph and walk out with it exposed, like, look at me, I just got my
my flash piece done.
Yeah, exactly. Not like that at all. It's more, and there's nothing wrong with that. They just have a different attitude toward it here, and their attitude seems more to be like, the tattoos are personal, they're for them. It's not really for other people at all.
Right.
It's a really personal, private thing. A lot of people, even their own families, don't end up knowing that they have tattoos. They don't talk about them at work. It's a lot of times I'll even have known somebody for years, and then maybe we'll, if we go on some kind of what would you say, like an onsen trip or something, and you end up going to the bathroom and you're like, oh, this guy had a tattoo all this time and I never even knew. That's a fairly common thing as well.
Are most of your clients male, or do you get a lot of women?
I'd say actually it's about 60-40 male to female right about now.
Really, eh?
Yeah, quite a few.
What are the women getting? They're not getting that tramp stamp on their back, are they?
No, it's usually smaller motifs, actually.
Right.
With girls, although that's not universally true. Once in a while, I'll have a female client who wants a larger piece. Those clients tend to be a little bit older, and the clients who want the smaller things tend to be a little bit younger.
Right. Yeah, that's really cool. I kind of like the idea that here in Japan, people are getting a little bit more personal tattoos instead of coming in and just picking something off the wall. I want this tribal around my arm, or I want this butterfly on my back.
Yeah, not so much of that. Even when people do come in and try to do things like that, I try to find a way that we can personalize it for them.
Right.
Just so that they're not getting something that 20 other people have.
Are those kind of Western designs popular with Japanese people, or do they go for the traditional Japanese stuff?
Most Japanese people now are getting more traditional Japanese tattoos. I think in the past, like I said, during that tattoo boom in like 1998, you saw a lot more Japanese people getting Western style motifs.
Right.
And that was more of an idea that we're going to break out from this sort of stigma surrounding tattoos and just go with things that are, more like fashion based than they are,
right,
based in like old Japanese traditions. And that led to sort of a renaissance in tattooing here. But again, now that's kind of, as a trend died down, there's been more of a return to we've basically come to the conclusion that, well, I don't need to apologize for being Japanese and apologize for my culture, and I think the motifs are cool, so I'm going to get them tattooed.
On your website, you mentioned something interesting that said that the tattoo world here does not even remotely resemble that of the West. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, it really doesn't. There's some things that, of course, look similar, things like inks and needles, really aren't that different fundamentally, but, or the fact that there's a lot of, serious artists who want to do good work. That's a similarity between the East and the West. I think when I say that the tattoo world doesn't resemble, I mean all of it. Things from tattoo aficionados to those who actually perform the work, to the way that the media reacts to tattooing. That's what I mean when I say the tattoo world isn't similar. There's a couple tattoo magazines here. In the West, there's, several. And there's a more almost like circus-y aspect to tattooing in the West. I think in the sense of like a media circus, you'll go to like an event and all the film crews are there, the local film crews are there, everybody's jumping up and down, doing cartwheels, fire, girls in swimwear, all sorts of things.
Right.
Food vendors, whatever, clothing vendors, all sorts of crazy stuff. It's like a big festival, it's like a fair, it's like a party. And then here it's way quieter in that regard. There's more of like a calmer appreciation.
So it's not so Hollywood here like it is in the West.
Yeah, there's not a lot of hootenanny, shall we?
You won't see like a Miami ink here, right? You won't see a Tokyo ink or anything like that.
Probably not, although I've had phone calls about that before.
One thing I'm very curious about is, and I think many people don't really understand the process of becoming a tattoo artist. I think we just kind of assume you can draw, you get a gun, and you start to go. But I take it that's not the case. What was the apprenticeship like in becoming a tattoo artist?
Generally, when one wants to become a tattoo artist, and this is also true in the West, is that you would get an apprenticeship there. You wouldn't go to like a school or anything like that because there's so much more to it than just the technical aspect. It's almost like it's more like a trade, and a trade is best learned through an expert who's already had several years' experience in the trade. It's like a traditional craft, So I think if you really want to learn, you have to find somebody who is competent, who you respect, who's serious about their work, and learn from a person like that. So in Japan, that isn't really that different either. I would say one big difference is the Japanese take the apprenticeships much slower, and it really does encompass every aspect of the shop. I mean, it's 24 hours. There's no days off to it, and that can last for some time. And it's a slow progression into the craft, starting from things that are very simple to things that are more complex. So, there's none of this spreading your wings and flying after you've only been at it for a couple weeks kind of a thing.
How long is the apprenticeship?
That really depends on the person doing the teaching. I mean, there's a lot of old schools of thought. I think one school of thought is that you would traditionally study for about 5 years, then you would work for 5 years to pay back what you studied, and then it would be more like that's when you get out of the nest. It's sort of the 10-year mark. Now, in my case, I guess I would say that I was studying for would have been about 3.5 years, maybe 3 to 3.5 years from the day I started before I made my actual debut, shall we say, as a tattoo artist. And then it's been working about a solid 5 years after that. So when I say 8 years so far, that's what I mean. I'm including those 3 years.
And what is the apprenticeship system like? Because we've always kind of heard these horror stories that they're really hard on apprentices, and they try to force you to quit, and that if you make it through, you kind of earn their respect. Is that true?
It is. I think when you talk about things like that, you want to just sort of be careful not to fall into the sort of Kill Bill syndrome where you just, you know what I mean, where it becomes such an exaggeration, where there's like ninjas jumping all over the place, and it's not quite like that. It's more. It's not like they're going to purposely try to screw you. It's you want to say it's like throwing the lion cub off the cliff to see if it'll climb back up, but it's not quite like that. It's just that they have a solid set of expectations, and you got to meet them. Right. And it's so common in the West for us to just apologize, quickly make an excuse, and then to quickly be forgiven. Whereas I think in the Japanese system, they take everything seriously, and then the idea is that if you can't handle small things, there's no way you can handle the responsibility of large things. And again, in America, for example, one thing people are really big on is something they call personal responsibility, which means you take responsibility for your own actions. Whereas the Japanese are big on something called shared responsibility, which means that your actions reflect on the actions of everybody in your firm, your company, your office, your tattoo studio. So that's why I think there's an initial need for that strictness in the first place. And I also think that's why it is the way it is. The culture sort of necessitates it.
Right.
But I guess, as far as what does it entail, I mean, a lot of things that Western ones entail, I'm sure, cleaning the shop, handling the phones, running errands, setting up stations, tearing down stations, building needles, all the things that are required to keep a studio running.
So during that time, you're not actually doing any tattooing?
No, but you are expected to draw. So as soon as work was done, the work of the shop, and everybody left, and that's when I would either stay at the shop or go somewhere else and just draw, just do as much drawing as I could. So I would have something to show them that I was working on top of the work, and that
is it unpaid work at the shop?
Oh yeah, it's totally unpaid. Yeah,
wow.
There's no money involved for that at all.
Right.
But in a way, it's usually the other way. It's usually that you eventually, when it's decided that you're going to come to the shop, you would pay them something initially.
Right.
Like a thanks for letting me study here kind of fee. I mean, you almost would think of it as a tuition of sorts.
Right. Was there any time you kind of thought, I'm going to head back to the States, or this is not worth it, or is it harder than you thought?
I think I thought that probably every day for the first 3.
Oh, really?
One tattooer who I really respect, he taught me a lot. His name's Corey Kruger, and he's from the East Coast, and he was out here doing some guest work, and I was having a real rough time, especially at that time. I mean, I hadn't gone anywhere with this thing yet. I was only about 1.5 years into it, and I was starting to despair. And he said, you know what? Once you start tattooing, like, everything will change. You just have to keep your eyes on that. And then that was sort of a comment that I remembered a lot through my apprenticeship, and it really got me through a lot of those hard times.
Right. Since you started, has kind of the trends in tattoo changed? Like what people are asking for?
Yeah, there's always trends. There's always things that people are into because someone else is into it or because it seems like the thing at the time. But I would say they're probably less influential in Japan, maybe than in the West. I think that there's a little bit of that, but a lot of times people are choosing motifs that are sort of, like I said, timeless. I mean, things like the Tales of the Water Margin, the Suikoden, or the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the Sangokshi. I mean, motifs like that appear in tattooing don't really change because they're old stories. I think what does change is that as tattoo technology sort of progresses, different inks are introduced, and different styles are introduced. People evolve the styles, not necessarily the motifs. The way of tattooing sort of changes. You know, the kinds of color schemes people are after, the kinds of layouts. I think that's a bigger change than the motifs themselves.
And the one thing I've kind of noticed about Japanese tattoos compared to, say, tattoos in the West is that it seems to me that it incorporates a lot more, shall I say, nature designs, like the carp, cherry blossoms, mountains. Whereas in the West, you see a lot of, say, for example, tribals or other kinds of symbolism.
That's a very good observation, and it's a true observation. And I'm sure because you're interested in Japan, then it sounds like a cliche, but it shouldn't. It's that the Japanese have very, very close ties to nature and very, very close ties to the seasons, and it comes across in their clothing, in their food, in all the culture that was developed during the Edo period, and that includes tattooing. So you can see natural motifs really take a front seat when it comes to Japanese tattoo motifs. There are motifs that people don't tire of because they're timeless, in the sense that as long as humans have been around, so have plants and flowers and animals, and it's only natural that the people of this archipelago would have assigned sort of roles or duties to those animals and gradually built a culture based on them. That's why people think that that's why there's sort of a superstition about fox spirits being devious, and why people think different things about different animals, and why certain things are seasonal. And certainly those motifs take up residence in Japanese tattooing as well.
Is there anybody here who still does it the traditional style with the stick on the needle type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the teibori, which means hand poking tattoo practitioners, still use tools like that. Those sorts of sticks, as you mentioned, are made from all sorts of things, anything from stainless steel to bamboo to wood. Some of them are elaborately carved, and then the needles are bound to the end with special kinds of string and then glued into place. And there's a whole culture about traditional hand poking tattooing as well, and there are still practitioners of it. Yeah, less studios like that are less likely to be just sort of out on the street, so to speak. They usually require an introduction of some sort or some sort of beforehand knowledge. Although that's changing. A lot of those guys are also branching out and reaching out to Western audiences and tourists who visit Japan and things like that.
Right. Would you say then, do you think that that there's probably a lot more people who have tattoos in Japan than, say, the general public realizes?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's of course no way to have any real statistics, but I think that's definitely the case. I mean, you never know who's out walking around who has tattoos, especially because the Japanese take so much care to cover them up, partially because they don't want to risk losing their jobs, and also because it's not for anybody else. It's for them. So,
right. And it's interesting that you mentioned losing your job, because that's not something you would normally associate within the West, but here in Japan, it actually is a big risk. What are your thoughts on the mayor of Osaka, who seems to be out with a campaign against anyone who's got tattoos?
Yes. Well, really, any sort of job here, you don't have a lot of recourse if they fire you. In terms of the mayor, our mayor has instituted, he made some comments initially about how he felt about tattoos, which was negative, and that public servants have no business getting them. And then there was a little bit of an incident here where a public servant, someone at a city office, was accused of showing a young kid one of his tattoos and apparently scaring him, and then this caused the mother to call and make a complaint, and then it eventually reached the mayor's office, and then he's sort of trying to put on to look like a populist hardliner, and so he sort of issued this creed that, okay, anyone who's a public servant, which includes, again, people who are garbage men, school teachers, anyone who does work for the city, and there's a lot of workers in the public sector. We probably employ more workers in the public sector in Japan than I would say per capita than people in the U.S. Just generally, there's a lot more social programs and things like that.
Right.
So that's a lot of people that are at risk, so to speak. Now, it'd be fine if you could just cover it up, but then he went on to say that during the compulsory medical inspections that they have every year, that he was going to institute a tattoo check where they have to get naked for a doctor or whoever, and if they have tattoos, they have to be reported. Well, now once you're entering that realm, yeah, it starts to smack of fascism a little bit. So he's received a lot of flack, even by, interestingly enough, a lot of Japanese people who don't like tattoos, but still on principle think that, it's anybody's right to have them. So yeah, he's received a lot of sort of negative response from that campaign. And then, of course, the media. I had every Japanese TV station and radio station in Osaka coming up in here wanting to talk about it. And I think that as Japanese politicians go, I think he's got a spine, and that's something I respect. But unfortunately, I'm on the wrong side of that right now. So,
right. What was his response to all the negative publicity?
I think his response is sort of dulled to, what, I have better things to do, but I'm still going through with it because my word is gold. I think what he thought was going to happen is, because there's a negative perception toward tattoos, I think he probably thought that it would be an easy, quick victory for him that would help him attain more victories later. But I don't think it's really worked out that way. Although there has been a large group of people who have been seeking out tattoo removal because they're afraid of losing their jobs, and it's because of comments like that now you have people who are walking around with medical scars, where their tattoos used to be.
Right.
So it's had a real impact on people's lives, and until now, especially Osaka has always been such a liberal city toward things like that. It's really surprising to see such a change.
Yeah, it's kind of refreshing in some ways to see a politician stand up for something that he believes in, even when the general public is against him. It's just that too bad that he's picked this particular topic to kind of push forward his own agenda.
That's true, because there's a lot of things that the guy is doing that I think are good, and he's making, there's a lot of hard decisions that Japanese politicians have to make right now, and a lot of things that are happening here that need to be addressed, and a lot of people don't want to make the hard decisions because, like I said, remember, it's shared responsibility, and nobody wants to be caught up in that. Right. So stand up and say, well, I'm just going to take responsibility is pretty cool.
Right.
But like I said, I'm not on the right end of it right now, but we'll see.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Benny. I really appreciate you coming on the show and giving us an insight into the tattoo world here in Japan. If people want to, are you accepting clients?
Oh yeah, man, I'm always accepting clients.
Okay.
But the fastest way is, if you're in Japan, is to actually come into the shop for a consultation. That's really the easiest way. I can be reached by our shop's phone number as well, and I have email and Facebook and Twitter and so forth, but those channels, the so-called social network channels, are usually the slowest for me.
Okay. So if people want to contact you off your website is benher.org, benher.org, and the shop that you work out of is chopsticktattoo.org as well.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thanks, Benny. Thanks for coming on the show.
No, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Thanks, Anthony.
I want to thank both my guests for coming on the show today. If you're interested in contributing to Unrested's Indiegogo campaign, head over to Indiegogo.com and do a search for Unusual Suspects. The name of his book is Angels, Daemons, and Beings Between, patron source book for DCC RPG. And you can see a quick video on the main page showcasing his artwork, which is unbelievable. Also, thanks to Benny for coming on the show. If you are interested in getting some ink done by Mr. Benny himself, visit chopsticktattoo.org. And just to let everyone know that he does work out of Osaka. So if you're up in Tokyo area, you need to head down to the lovely city of Osaka. That's it. That wraps up this episode of Tokyo Podcast. I want to thank everyone for listening. Don't forget to check out my Facebook page at facebook.com/Tokyo Podcast. And if you are on Twitter, feel free to send me a message at Tokyo Podcast as well. And if you're a photographer, feel free to join me on Instagram, where I post a daily picture of my activities and life here in Japan. That's it. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm Anthony Joe, and bye-bye.